Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. And on today's program, we have two good friends of mine. These guys are icons in this community when it comes to the issues of trafficking. You know, when Jesus gave his pronouncement of his job description, when he stood up in the synagogue, he said one of his jobs was to set the captives free, which becomes one of our jobs as well. And so let me introduce you to these folks, just brief introductions. I could go on and on. But to my immediate left is Tomas, and I never say his last name. It's Lares, or he said I could do German Lars, but I'm sure it's Spanish, and I don't know how to do that. So I can't roll my R's or anything like that.
So good.
But Tomas is the the founder and executive director of Florida Abolitionists. That name speaks for itself. But he's also the co-founder and chairman of the Greater Orlando Human Trafficking Task Force. And so he's got a long history of fighting for human rights and freedom and dignity in our community. And I'm excited to hear his perspective from that of an advocate. Then we've got another perspective, and this is Ron Stucker, who was with the Orange County Sheriff for 29 years. He attained the rank of major, but since 2015, he's been the director of the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation, which is the law enforcement agency that deals with many issues, but including what we used to call vice crimes, and they deal with prostitution and sex trafficking, as well as other issues. So, guys, thanks for being here with me today. This is a tough subject, and honestly, I pray for you guys because I don't know how you can do what you do and not get totally depressed. But thank you on behalf of the community. I want to start out with you, Ron. You have been in this field for quite a long period of time. When it comes to law enforcement agencies, I know that you don't deal just with laws, you deal with people. And I know that you see both the people that are trying to further this kind of trafficking, but you also deal with people who are trying to help with this kind of give us kind of a rundown of who are the folks in the community that are very helpful to law enforcement, and who are the folks that you're trying to convince to be helpful for law enforcement. That's an open question, but so you can go anywhere you want to with it.
Well, you know, it's an interesting question, Dr. Hunter, because we need more help in this area. And one of the things that we're always talking about is trying to educate people as to what exactly human trafficking is. Because everyone can be helpful. We have school teachers, counselors in schools, faith-based organizations, just people in the community, people in the hotel industry, people at restaurants that are very helpful to us, that will provide us tips, that see things that they are concerned about. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what human trafficking is. And so it's going on right around them, and they seem to think it's some third world country problem. It can't be happening here in my backyard.
Could you give us a brief definition of human trafficking, what it is?
Sure. Human trafficking in the state of Florida, under state statutes in Florida, really falls into two distinct categories. It's commercial sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So labor trafficking, for instance, would be that somebody is being compelled to work for no wage or low wage or under very severe conditions. That's probably a layman's definition of that. On the commercial sex trafficking side, you have to define between adults and juveniles. So with adults, you have to have the elements of a crime of force, fraud, or coercion. And that is when someone is forcing somebody, with force, fraud, physical force, coercion, to be engaged in the commercial sex act, really to be engaged in prostitution. Now with juveniles, you don't need force, fraud, and coercion. If somebody is prostituting a juvenile under the laws of Florida, they are automatically, that juvenile is considered a victim of human trafficking.
And juvenile is from what age down?
Under the age of 18.
Under the age of 18. Tell us where the Orlando area kind of ranks nationally as far as having this kind of challenge.
The statistics show with the National Human Trafficking Hotline that Florida really ranks and is ranked third in the number of calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Let me qualify that just a little bit. I'm not sure that means that we have a more significant problem than other places. I think a lot of it is we're more aware of the issue and we have people that are engaged in it and wanting to do something.
Good.
It's not it's not as in the shadows as it used to be.
Oh, that's helpful.
It's not there. I mean, it's because people are seeing this, they're calling in, they're reporting it because they are being educated. They do want to be involved. Where somewhere else, maybe they're just ignoring it.
Yeah.
And so the calls to the hotlines may not indicate there's more of a problem, but it may indicate we're doing more about the problem.
Oh, I'd love to think of it like that. I'd love to, that's great. Thomas, let me turn to you. Tomas, I keep doing this. It's Tomas. Tomas has again, one of the heroes of this community because he really is taking this on all levels and he is gathering together fellow advocates in order to make a difference. That's not something that Ron can do, especially in his role or specifically in his role, but that's something that we need a lead instigator when we're talking about this problem. You just were in Tallahassee, that's our capital for those of you who are out of the area, dealing with a specific legislation, dealing with the hotels, wanting them to take some responsibility for the activity that may be taking place on their property. And so would you tell us about that, kind of what are the sides of that when we talk about people taking action, taking responsibility, if somebody reports activity in a hotel, and there's nothing done about it. Tell us about that.
Sure. So for several years now, we've been training hotel management, security teams, along with MBI and others, on what to look for, signs. We know that the traffickers and pimps are using our hotel motels in Florida to traffic boys and girls, men and women. And just even calls that we get on the local human trafficking hotline and through Polaris, the hotline the director mentioned, a lot of the victims are in hotels. They've actually called from hotel motel and saying, trafficker's gone, I have to make a quota, I want to get out. And so we have been able to assist many. And the issue is that most of our hotel and motel associations or franchise are ready and willing to learn and we report this activity, but there's always a few bad apples. Survivors tell us that they are, those were the main places where they were trafficked, and that at times people turn a blind eye, and what I say is they're putting profits before people's lives. And so this new legislation that was introduced by Representative Ross Spano from Tampa is that hotels, motels, restaurants can be sued if they're found complicit in trafficking humans.
So, and you mentioned that this was one of the first ones in the country, or the first one in the country? Or?
So what happened, Dr. Hunter, is that special interest groups want to be exempt, want the hotel, motel industry to be exempt in Florida so that it could never be sued by a survivor or any kind of civil litigation. And we're saying that's the wrong message to send.
Yeah.
That we don't want our cities and towns in Florida to be a sanctuary for these criminals. Yeah. That if the hotels are exempt and they can't be sued, then where's the accountability?
Yeah, exactly. Let me ask you, let me just step back just for a moment, because you mentioned look for the signs. We teach people how to look for the signs. This has a very broad viewing audience, but I'm sure everybody would be interested in what are those signs? What could I notice that of someone who might be in trouble, so that and what's what should I report if I, if I do notice something like this? So, Ron, let me go to you, and then I'm going to come back to you, Tomas, and ask you both. Okay.
Sometimes there's very acute signs that you can see. If you see someone who is, and normally it's a female that's being trafficked. Not always. Mm-hmm. There are males that are trafficked. There are juvenile males being trafficked. But for the sake of discussion, we'll just call them females for now. Mm-hmm. If she's being controlled, if you see a female who's not allowed to use a cell phone, that someone's controlling her movements, controlling her communication. If it was in the hotel industry and you see different people going in and out of a hotel room on a continual basis, things along those lines. Human trafficking is really about control, so you're looking for those signs of control in which they're being isolated from the community, they're being isolated from communication. When you see somebody who has that fear or they're intimidated by somebody, that could be the signs of other things. That could be the signs of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of these crimes where you have this control involved overlap. Mm-hmm. But those are some of the key things people can look for.
Where would they call if somebody saw something they're really concerned? And how could they contact authorities?
We always tell people, if you see someone who's immediately you think is in danger, right then call 911.
Okay.
Because they are going to dispatch a police officer or deputy sheriff that scene. We don't ask a citizen to try to dissect all the elements of a crime. They may not know. This could be human trafficking. It could be domestic violence. It could be just to be a runaway. They don't know. Mm-hmm. But the quicker we can get a law enforcement officer on the scene right then to investigate and determine, they can then try to help somebody and determine the best course of action for them. Gotcha. Now, of course, if it's something longer term, they're welcome to call local law enforcement, and they call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, who will pass information on to us. Gotcha. But we always encourage people, if you see something right now, don't wait an hour, don't wait a couple days, because those leads have grown cold. We may not be able to find them.
Yeah.
We get a lot of tips that we roll on, but the tips have grown stale within 24 hours, and by the time we get there, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
So call 911, let us get out there and find out what's going on.
Good. Tomas, what would you add to this kind of the signs you look for of somebody who may be in trouble in this way?
Sure. So the commonality of that control and power, similar to domestic violence, or even victims of sexual assault, as we're seeing now on the news every evening. There's a fear element, and that victim doesn't want to speak up. Maybe there has been threats against their family, their loved ones. So I would say that control is very big part of this. Mm-hmm. They go to the emergency room and they won't separate. They'll say, I'm her boyfriend. And so we've trained emergency room personnel to separate if they see something suspicious or they see this control. So it could be as emergency room, a health department. It could be other places where folks are noticing, pregnancy centers are calling and saying, hey, this guy comes in and he has all her information. He hands us her license. He doesn't want her to go back. Again, those are all signs something's not right.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. You both have been in this, for a pretty long time, a respectable period of time. Very simple question. Is it getting better or worse?
Sure. Well, I think, Dr. Hunter, that as the rector stated, Florida I'm really proud of being a Central Floridian, because we are reporting, folks are reporting if it's a minor, even the DCF abuse hotline, which they have a maltreatment code for human trafficking. They're calling the national hotline out of Polaris in DC. They're calling our local office. And so we just celebrate the 10th annual Human Trafficking Awareness Day here in Orlando in January. And we've seen tens of thousands of people come to these awareness days. And then many of them are requesting for their congregation, for their group training thereafter. Mm-hmm. So there's been literally tens of thousands of Central Floridians trained. And our folks are responsible. They're calling, they see something, they're saying something, whether it's in a school or something suspicious in their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that trafficking is getting worse. We don't know that. But I think that our citizens are taking this serious, and that's something to be actually proud of.
Good. Ron, how would you respond to that?
Is it getting better or worse? It's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think as far as the crime, I don't think we're seeing any less.
Okay.
I think we at MBI and law enforcement, when we do our details, I mean, we will play the various roles as an undercover role. We can easily start looking online, and within a very few minutes already have made contact with dozens and dozens of prostitutes via text messages, cell phones, attempting to set up appointments with them. I think probably your viewers would be absolutely shocked at the number of people, particularly women out there, that are posted online for commercial sex.
Yeah. Let me interrupt you just for a second here. Don't forget where you were, because I want to come back to it. But do you have a sense that because of the proliferation of pornography, and that there's more of an acceptability of these coercive acts, and that's a part of a broadening panorama of things that used to shock us. You use the word shock. That's what kind of jarred me into this. That the standards for shock, we've become desensitized in a lot of ways to things that used to, just be other folks did, but it would never enter into the media that we have. Speak to that just for a second.
I think a lot of it's just the availability of it. If you looked years ago, I mean, back when I was a teenager, a child or whatever, if there was a young man who wanted to see pornography, I mean, it was the Playboy magazine and the brown wrapper behind the counter at the convenience store.
Right.
Now you push a button on your computer and you will get thousands and thousands and thousands of images. So the availability out there of what young people, what people in general can see and what they're exposed to every day is much more prevalent.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, psychologists would have to speak to how that desensitizes people and what they do. That kind of gets out of my lane there, but it's not uncommon, particularly when we have people that are engaging in a commercial sex act with a minor, that we then also find child sex pornography on computers, on phones. Gotcha. Those kind of go hand in hand there.
I gotcha. Okay. Do you remember where you were when I interrupted you?
We were talking about, is it better or worse?
Okay,
I don't think the issue of this commercial sex trade is getting better. It's just very prevalent out there. Yeah. It's difficult to measure. I'll speak for law enforcement. I think we're doing so much better than we used to do 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, I've been in law enforcement over 30 years now, in local law enforcement. And when I started out as a young deputy, it was just prostitutes and pimps and johns. And whoever you could make a case on went to jail. Yeah. And there was really no follow-up for any of them to do anything about it. And we're doing so much better today, recognizing the cycle of victimization. Yeah. And so I think for law enforcement, we're doing better. I think we're doing better in that advocacy route of attempting to find people and bring them out of that cycle, attempting to change their life. Yes. We're not always successful. Yeah. It's incredibly difficult. Yeah. I was reading some statistics recently where, and Tomas probably knows these better than I do, where a woman, a female who's involved in prostitution may have to have 8 different encounters before she even self-identifies as being a human trafficking victim. So it's a continual struggle. Yeah. I mean, it's not a difficult crime to change.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Stockholm Syndrome, where the victim over a period of time begins to see her captors as really her safeguards, and these are people who protect me, and so there's almost a switch in self-understanding of what's happening.
Well,
absolutely.
To play off that point, if I might, it's an interesting phenomena in human trafficking that sometimes a woman who has been trafficked now becomes the partner with her trafficker, and she actually begins to recruit other prostitutes. Yeah. Yeah. And she becomes an integral part of that organization, that she may continue to prostitute, but she actually becomes a recruiter and an organizer.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting phenomenon to see because we're, a woman who might be vulnerable or on the street may be hesitant if a man is saying, hey, come with me, come do this. Maybe there's some intimidation there. But if another woman comes to her and says, and is empathetic, hey, I've been where you are. Hey, we can make some money here. It's not that bad. I do it myself. Can draw them in and play off that vulnerability. Yeah. So we actually see that where the victim becomes the trafficker.
Yeah, interesting. Tomas, Ron mentioned that there's a fuller picture of redemption, if you will, of taking a life and not just stopping the bad that has happened, but actually helping people into a whole different life. Could you give us a picture of how that's done?
Sure. And if Dr. Hunt, I can just speak even on the
of course
the problem. I think that what is getting worse is what the director referred to as availability or access. And so I was at one of our good colleges here in Central Florida speaking, and I'll just give you this example. There's probably 100 students in that classroom, and I had talked about human trafficking, recruiting that's going online, all the different signs. At the end of my speech, I said, how many would still send a picture or an appropriate video for money? And mostly the whole class raised their hand. And I was shocked. Did anybody hear me in the last hour? And I asked them why. And their answering was very sobering and concerning. And this is where I feel it's getting worse. They said, we're already doing it for free. Why not get paid?
Wow.
And there's with our young people, the prevention side is critical, that we educate our students that these folks are not their friends, whoever they're all on social media. They're sending pictures, inappropriate videos. At the least worst, I said, you are now have an image or something that could ruin your career, a relationship. There could be sextortion, blackmail. The worst is that you're being recruited into a human trafficking ring, and your life will never be the same. And so that's where, if we can prevent and get the message out to our students in both public and private schools that this is not a time to, it's been normalized. I think that's what has happened.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole sex industry or pornography or that access is like normal now for them. And so they think it's funny, or they're meeting new friends, and it's actually something that we all need to be aware of and educate it more.
Yeah. That's really good. What about somebody who, the circuit breaker just went off? I sold an image. I sold, I've gotten way further than I wanted to go, and I'm in this cycle now. How do I get out? How do you help somebody like that?
Sure. So there's the different levels of involvement. So, what we would refer to the Stockholm Syndrome, a lot of times that's when what we call the trauma bonds, right? That person can't really see it for what it is. And I know, working with MBI for years and the FBI agents, they will interview these victims, and they'll not see themselves as a victim. That's my boyfriend, that's my daddy, or somebody that took care of them. A lot of times, Dr. Hunt, it's sad because that's the only person, they said that when they said they're going to slap them, they got a line, they got slapped. The only person that kept their word as an authority in their life. And so they want the negative attention rather than no attention. And so I feel like part of this is an understanding of the trauma that's involved, but then also understanding that person has hopes and dreams. And if we can reach them with those positive things that they can fill in their life and fill that void, then that's something that we need to do. And that's why we say we're client-centered or victim-centered, is we want to reach that individual and show them that they have honor and dignity.
Yeah. We need way more time than we've got right now. This is killing me to end this interview, but let me sum up for you who are listening in this way. There's been such a heightening of awareness, all the way from the more recent openness about sexual harassment and the coercion that goes on in daily life that we weren't terribly aware of before, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where people are literally slaves. And we want to know what we can do. And I think what you just heard is that there are two things on both ends of those spectrums that you can do. First of all, if you see something and you're pretty certain that somebody's in trouble, by all means call 911, report it. The best that can happen maybe is that there was nothing. You just, but it's better to be safe and help people be safe. But from a positive standpoint, what Tomas was just talking about is many people get into this downward cycle, this slippery slope, because they're just looking for love. They're looking for someone in their life to keep their word. And so we can do a lot on the prevention side. We can give people the dignity and worth that they're looking for. We can teach them to respect themselves as they respect others, and to demand that respect from others. Especially those of you who are parents, start early with this, because your kids are looking to you as to what they should allow and shouldn't allow, how they should be treated. And especially you fathers and grandfathers and uncles, you treat your young children and grandchildren and nieces in a way that you would want them to expect to be treated by anybody. So we thank you for being with us today. We're out of time, but I want to thank you all and our panelists, Ron and Tomas. Again, I cannot thank you enough. You don't know how these folks are really respected in this community. They really are. But thank you for joining us today on Power Talks. Remember, these discussions are just that. They're discussions among us. We'd love to see you continue the discussions at home and go one step farther. Get involved. Because when power talks, you are empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.